Welcome, everyone, to the Firing the Man podcast. On today's episode, we are joined by Tyler Jefcoat, the founder and CEO of Seller Accountant, where he exercises his passion for helping sellers maximize their businesses. Tyler provides financial coaching for sellers totaling more than $100 million per year in e-commerce sales. Tyler also leads the Sellers Roundtable, an exclusive mastermind group for 7- and 8-figure sellers. Welcome to the show, Tyler.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So first things first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your path to founding Seller Accountant?
Yeah, sure. It's always fun to get to kind of tell the story. So I'm also, I guess, a recovering accountant, David. So once an accountant, always one. So I finished school, worked with a nonprofit for a couple of years, and ended up in corporate. You're talking about firing the man. This is my story. Like I was a middle manager in the Fortune 100 company, a big bank, and hated my life and ended up back in an MBA program at the same time and realized I needed to fire my corporate sponsorship, pay back about $25,000 in MBA tuition, and go start a business in 2012 in the healthcare space. We had a pretty good run, 0 to 100 employees in 4 years, and I got to sell that business in 2017. And then my job was to try to find a job because my wife didn't want me at home all day. And she doesn't like big cities. We live in Athens, which is this great little quaint college town east of Atlanta. And I'm like, well, hell, now what am I going to do? And so back to my kind of I'm a CFO by trade, right? You get an MBA in finance and you study accounting. Like, you're not good at much. You can't, I tried to help my dad build a bridge last week and it was an abysmal failure. Like, I need to be messing with spreadsheets, boys. And so we start Seller Accountant around the thesis that there are riches and niches. Can we find a way to be so great and focused? I love coaching CEOs. I love the idea of helping the little guy, that kind of sub $20 million entrepreneur excel and win in the sea of Bezos, baby. He's getting paid. Like that extra penthouse is going to happen even in a bearish market. But how can we ensure that the little guy is successful? And so Seller Accountant, that's what we do. And so I was grateful to find a good business partner that kind of knew Amazon better than I did. I'd been an eBay seller back in college. So like building guitars and selling stuff and side hustling. And this has been my first full foray into e-commerce in the past 5.5 years. It's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah. So if we go down the rabbit hole of spreadsheets, we're in great company with Tyler and David here. So yeah, with me, no, but definitely you guys. So awesome. Well, let's dig into it. So Tyler, you've got a unique perspective in terms of working with like lots and lots of clients in the e-commerce space. And so can you maybe cover some of the trends, what you've observed from the successful sellers, and maybe we can harvest some good information out of that?
Yeah. So I think I heard a friend say this the other day. Every CEO makes money in a bull market, right? So we had most e-commerce brands in 2020 and 2021 felt like superheroes because it was pretty frothy. And I think what we're seeing now that things have sobered a little bit is the companies that have, it's kind of like a win for common sense, but the companies that have a better fundamental value proposition, like they actually are connected with their customers and that they have great products. Their products are actually solving a real problem. Those products it's harder to have a Me Too product be successful right now. And so I think accounting is what it is. I think at the end of the day, product rules and our relationships with our customers are crucial. And so the kinds of brands that are doing the best right now are the ones that are not running out of cash. That's kind of first and foremost in a weird market. And two, have product and product relationship kind of with their customer where they know, here's what she wants, here's what she cares about. And I'm just also acknowledging it's harder, right? This has been a year where nobody in our portfolio hasn't faced some level of headwinds this year, but not everyone is losing. So I think there are some sellers that are like, well, everyone's got to lose money this year. That's not true. There are lots of brands in 2022 that are profitable. They're just having to work harder to squeeze a little bit more, blood out of those stones, that kind of thing.
Got it.
Okay.
That makes a lot of sense. Now we've talked about the successful sellers. Now, certainly you probably have some people that become clients for a couple months and then fall off because financial performance isn't there. And so any trends you've observed in terms of who's not performing?
I think the biggest one that I see over and over again, David, is just not actually understanding your profit margins. So if you're and again, I sell bookkeeping, so conflict of interest here. But if you don't really understand how much money you made last month, Then when Amazon has an 8% increase in FBA fees, you have a hard time knowing what the real impact of those fee increases might be on your bottom line. And I'll give an example. I was on a call with a CFO client this week who is still losing money on these new product launches. I'm like, okay, like help me articulate the plan. How are we going to get this thing to profitability? And he's like, well, we're gonna tolerate this really high tacos to get to a certain ranking, and then we're gonna be okay, and we're gonna be able to ease back. And my comment to him is like, in some markets you can get away with that. Right now, you've got to be pretty high and tight with your strategy to make sure you don't want to guess. That's maybe my point. Is I think the kind of ability to make a living being kind of half-assed with it is much more challenging now. And so that's number one, is I got to pay attention to profit. Number two, I mentioned this a second ago, but I want to say it again. It is not as easy to get a loan right now as it was a year ago. And so I am not going to make every purchasing decision perfectly. I'm going to screw up. I'm going to miss the timing. I'm going to do an ad campaign that doesn't make sense. Oops, I got to learn the lesson. And so making sure that I have a little bit of extra cash on my balance sheet, a little bit of money in the bank, so that I can weather the storm if I have to pay some. My dad used to call it education expense, right? If I make a bad choice and it costs me money, it doesn't have to kill me if I have cash, but it's at least education expense. And so I just encourage everybody right now to have a little bit of money in the bank account so that in case you have to fund any education expense, you can.
Okay. In these first two questions, we've talked about successful sellers, unsuccessful sellers. I want to pop back to the successful sellers really quick and ask a question about Q4, which is very timely as we're talking right now. In terms of profitability, PPC, what are the smart sellers doing to gear up for this Q4, especially with these increased FBA fees?
Yeah, I think it's more important than ever now to have kind of a coordinated strategy. Like you obviously, here's kind of the way I view it. If I could somehow stack rank my ASINs, like let's say I sell 10 different products, and if I could understand from top to bottom, this one's my most profitable product, and this one way at the bottom is my least profitable. And if I could make sure that I do not stock out of that top 20%. So again, think about it. If I have 10 products, those top two, baby, I am not stocking out of those. I don't care what is required. I'm going to hold more of my precious capital and resources in those two products. And I'm going to be okay. If I stock out on number 9 or number 10 on the list, you know what? It happens. Those are my lowest margin products anyway. And so I think whenever you enter a market where you have kind of scarcity, I don't have unlimited resources anymore, it becomes increasingly crucial to focus on your most profitable products. And so kind of step one is, well, which products are my happiest, which ones are not my happiest? And once I identify my real heroes, now for some sellers, this is obvious. I sell one ASIN that's like my only profitable product, and that's like 80% of my sales. Okay, don't stock out of that one, and don't waste too many ad dollars on the other one, right? But for more sophisticated catalogs, or maybe you have 50 or 60 products, I just think it's worth a couple of hours of making sure you know what your winners and losers are. And then it's kind of like, I can't fight all the battle fronts at the same time. I got to pick the front to put as much of my resources at as possible. And that front needs to be aligned with my best product so that I can capture as much margin as possible.
Yeah, I like that. And also, Tyler, you mentioned like things have like the last couple of years have been like frothy, really nice, and now we're kind of entering into a phase of maybe not scarcity, but maybe a little bit thinner margins and a little bit tougher. Now, are there any like it's almost like the Pareto principle, right? Like 80-20, like what 20% of your products are bringing in 80% of your profit. Now, when you look at when an e-commerce seller gets their P&Ls every month, we should be looking at them, and we should be gleaning information from them, and then utilizing that to improve our business. So what are the top 2 or 3 things that you advise e-commerce sellers when they're analyzing the P&Ls to look for, and what action should you be taking?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So, I mean, let's be real. Unless you're an accountant like me and David, most people don't love looking at their financial statements. But again, to your point, Ken, as the market gets a little bit tighter, it's really important to, guys, take 30 minutes a month. This doesn't need to dominate your life, but take a little bit of time and pull up your Xero, your QuickBooks Online, or whatever it is you're using. And what I'm really interested in as an accountant and CFO is if I look at my month over month, so I kind of have October next to November. And I want to make sure that my accounting is in a pretty close to accrual fashion, not to get too accountant nerdy, but I want to make sure that I'm expensing my inventory in the month when I sell it. And the reason I care about that is I want to know that my profit margin is not telling me BS. What I mean by that is if you ever look at your P&L, let's say you split it by month and it's like 5 or 6 months in columns, and your gross profit's like positive 50%, negative 20%, positive 15%, negative 80%, right? You have this all over the map. That means that your financial statements give you zero value. There is zero value in looking at those statements because they're stated in what's called a cash basis. So the first thing, have good books. Second thing is don't ignore them. Once they're good, they're telling you a story that you need to pay attention to. So for instance, I look at a month and I'm like, my tacos just went from 10% to 20%. Well, that's important. My advertising budget just doubled. I need to go take a step back and ask the critical question. Was this a part of my strategy? Am I launching a new product where I was intending to spend double on my ad budget? Or have I hired a marketing vendor and I've let them go rogue and I didn't realize I'm burning a lot of cash? And so, which by the way, that happens a lot, right? And so I think, starting to look down your P&L and just keep an eye. At Seller Accountant, we use a metric called PAG, post advertising gross profit. It's the idea of taking your gross profit area and going down one more line to include those advertising expenses. Because in e-commerce, you can't understand your margins without understanding ads. That fuel that you have to put on the fire to get the product to move is so crucial that's what I would really pay attention to if I were a seller.
Definitely. I want to dig into this PAG a little bit because you're absolutely right. Yeah, PPC is a huge component of it. And while it may sit in operating expenses, it's not. It really is a cost of goods sold and should be considered that way. So when somebody goes through this exercise, and they're calculating the PAG percentage, right? So your what does PAG stand for again? Your post advertising gross profit. That's that right. Divided by revenue.
That's right.
When you look at that percentage, what would you say? Like generally, you're doing great, or generally, you got an issue?
No, and this is great and this is so important because there's a lot of pressure on this right now. So everyone, if they were to pull up their profit and loss right now, is going to feel a little less happy than they were probably a year ago, just because of the way the market has evolved. And so just to define post-advertising gross profit, so you kind of visualize your P&L, you get sales minus your product cost to get sold, minus your Amazon fees. And then I'm also adding advertising, right? So I'm getting kind of a true, they call it contribution margin after ads. And so as a percentage of sales, if you are below 10%, you're dead. That's an unsustainable model. If it's funny, a year ago, I would have said if you were below 15%, you're dead, but there has been some compression this year in margins where some of my sellers are having to tolerate 17 or 18% profit margins to kind of weather the current storm. So again, we're moving up the list here. If you're above 20% right now in 2022, you're probably okay, but you're not premium. And so my target, if I were launching a new product, if you're like, Tyler, let's engineer a new product, I'm going to do everything in my power to try to engineer a product that can capture at least 25% after advertising. So you think about that. I've got COGS, I've got my Amazon fees, logistics fees, that kind of thing. And then I've got ads, and I want to try to keep 25%. And by the way, just in case you're wondering, the brands that sold last year for like 7 and 8x multiples when the market was really, to use that word again, frothy, those guys were capturing 30, 35 or more points after advertising. Those are the brands that were really capturing the premium valuations of the market.
Okay. Now, a follow-up question to this. If, say, we're sitting at 15 or a seller's sitting at 15% and they want to improve, there's a couple levers that they can pull. Some of them are in their control. Some of them are out. So, right, you start at the top, you've got sales. You could increase your sales price. You could negotiate better pricing and decrease your cost of goods sold. That's kind of in your control, but ultimately someone else has to give you the thumbs up on that. You could decrease ad spend. That is in your control. What of those levers have you seen to be the most effective in increasing this post-advertising gross profit?
I think you kind of nailed it there. Some of these variables, like for instance, okay, Amazon decides to increase FBA fees. We don't like that. We're sad, but frankly, Amazon's still cheaper than the alternative. So we hem and haw about it and we move about our business. There's not a lot we can do to impact an FBA fee. It just is what it is, unless we can re-engineer the packaging or something like that. But the two that you mentioned there, so let me just say this. I had a CFO call yesterday where we realized that this particular client had a 22% refund rate. That's really, really, really high. And so the first thing I would do is I would just look through my P&L and say, is there anything that's just completely out of whack? 22% refund rate would be very much out of whack for this category. And so for that guy, the lowest hanging fruit was to realize, oh, my customers are getting confused about the sizing of this product for pets. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go spend some money for some professional videos to educate the consumer so that they buy the right size and they don't have to return it as often. That's, if you ever see anything like that, celebrate, because that's a sub $10,000 investment you can make and maybe have a substantial impact on your bottom line. But beyond that experience there, the two that you mentioned that I think are more important than anything else are the product cost of goods sold and the advertising. And I would even go so far as to say, we like to look at these two in tandem. Let me give you an example. If you were to look at your cost of goods sold as a percentage of your sales price, and it's really, really high, let's say it's like 50%. Like I sell the product for $100, I got to pay $50 to secure the product. That's a really high COGS factor. Then I have zero budget for advertising. If that's my reality, if I have 50% of my budget in COGS, I don't have a whole lot left for ads. And so you imagine the opposite end of the spectrum, where maybe I have an unbelievably high profit margin product where I've got like only 12% of my sales prices in COGS. Oh, baby, now I can afford to spend money on advertising and be more aggressive because I have higher margins in the product. And so I almost, if you can imagine kind of like a seesaw between those two variables, the higher my COGS are, the lower that advertising load has to be if I'm going to be viable. But if I can engineer products with more margin, or if I can, as you mentioned there, raise my price a little bit, that gives me permission to outcompete my competitors and spend more money on ads. So people ask me all day, they probably ask you too, David, but like people always ask me, what's the right tacos? What's the right ad budget? And I'm like, that's the wrong question. The right question is, how much margin do I have in my product where I can afford to outcompete my competitors on ads? And I need to kind of earn the right to spend those ad dollars where I can buy that real estate and get higher ranking. But I can't do that unless I engineer products with higher value propositions and are able to charge a higher price point and have higher margins. And so I think those work in tandem. So obviously you can't change that overnight. I would look at my reality. My reality is that my cost of goods sold is X. Okay. Given that reality, that means I can only afford to spend Y on my ads. That's probably how I would approach it, in the current form.
One follow-up question on that, Tyler. Let's, for example, we have a brand that's, let's say this brand has a catalog of 10 products. Would it be more profitable to manage given what you just said, would it be more profitable to manage tacos on an individual product level or across the portfolio of catalog products? Let's say we're targeting a 10% tacos. Would you, across that portfolio of products, would that be more profitable, or would you go individual SKUs and based on your seesaw and change the tacos for each of those SKUs? What's more profitable?
Yeah, I would be in a situation where they're all children of the same parent. You maybe would manage them as an entire kind of parent product. But in a situation where these are distinctly different products, I really do believe in having a profit strategy for each of my products, because I may have a product that has a higher margin where I can afford to spend more on ads. That's great news, because I might be able to sneak an insert or a QR code to continue to earn relationships with the customer. And I think ultimately, obviously, your entire portfolio needs to have a tacos target of whatever makes sense. But the only way I'm going to really impact that is to get kind of granular, to your point there, Ken, and look at each product and say, oh, I can't afford to spend 20% on this product on ads. Great. But on this one, I can't. And I'm going to have to be nuanced enough to kind of have it. Is that kind of how you guys view it? I want to make sure I'm aligned with y'all here. Yeah.
Yeah. So we look at it from a couple different perspectives, but at the parent level or portfolio level. So, and I think it's, it's can be all over the place depending on what space you're in or what market you're in. But I was just curious, in terms of the numbers, but it makes sense. David, anything to add in on that one?
No. Really good question. I think it leads into our next question pretty well. So one thing that we're doing, and we've talked a little bit about on the podcast, is trying to fail on paper before launching products. We have right now more ideas than we have capital. And so what we're trying to do is make educated decisions on, because when you launch a product, you never really know. However, there's a lot of things that are known and knowable. I can know what my FBA fee is. You can know what your referral fee is. You can look at competitors and know what your sales price is. And so I'm curious if you have any rules of thumb between the relationship between your landed cost, right? Unit cost plus shipping, tariffs, et cetera, and sales price, or maybe it doesn't have to do with those two factors, but to someone that is, say, has 3 ideas, but only capital to launch one, how can they make the optimal decision before they place that PO?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you guys were on my podcast, I'd be asking the same question, because this is the, product development art and science. But I really think you alluded to it there. In a market where I don't have unlimited resource, I can't launch every product. It's still a great idea to have lots of ideas. Maybe that was the first point you made there, David, is I don't want to just have one idea. I don't know whether it's the best idea I have unless I have 10 ideas. And then I do the good old fashioned, spreadsheet exercise, Ken, right? Where we put them down and we look at them. And I will say this, all things being equal, I never know for sure what my advertising budget's going to have to be. I don't know how good I'm going to be at attacking those keywords. And so the thing that I'm going to feel most confident in is having more margin in the product. So if you gave me a choice between, I mean, obviously it's like, of course, like if one has a much 20% cost of goods sold versus 30%, I'm going to go with that 20% because that's a higher margin product. But I think in general, just thinking, okay, even if I could sell more volume of one product, if I can get much better margins on another one, I may go there. Another rule of thumb that is kind of underappreciated is, do I understand what my cash cycle is? So if I think about this particular supplier, I've already got a relationship with them because of a prior unit that I've bought before. Therefore, I can get 60-day terms on payments. I don't have to pay those POs right away. There's a chance that I actually might be happier. This is going to sound crazy. I'm a CFO, but like a slightly smaller profit margin, but lots of velocity where I can reuse that dollar 5 or 6 times a year may result in a happier business owner. And so I just think it's a complex discussion, because I want to have as much margin as possible, and I want to have as much cash flexibility as possible, like lowest MOQs, longest runway to have to pay for them. And if I can somehow graph those, all 12 of my ideas, and find the one that intersects at the highest optimal point of those 2 factors, that's what I would go with if you gave me the choice.
That answer and that topic kind of goes well into this next question. And this is so as we're entering into maybe kind of a skimpy market where we're trying to squeeze this P&L down. We're trying to squeeze the bottom to where it's larger. And let's say a seller has a large catalog of products. And I think sometimes this is hard. This is an emotionally, like when you build a company, it's kind of your baby, and it's like you don't want to get rid of anything. But to your point of turning over inventory, that's how you're making profit, is that you're turning inventory, right? And so if you're holding on cash, you're not turning inventory, you're not making profit. So what is your advice to sellers? Say they have 50 SKUs they're selling. What is this exercise to weed out the bottom 10, 20% to get more cash to feed the new products and the top products?
No, it is an emotional one, because you don't like shooting your children, and you feel like your babies are your products and you've developed them. And, I don't want to get too technical on this particular podcast because we'll lose all of our listeners, but there's a concept out there called return on working capital that actually gives us true return on investment for every dollar that's put into a product. And so I'll try to give you guys some links to some videos I've done about that. I don't want to try to get into the weeds here unless you guys want to,
Sure.
But like if I had a way to objectively compare my entire catalog, top to bottom, happiest product in terms of return on investment to lowest product, and I was realistic about how hard it is. Interest rates are going up, guys. So getting a loan in 2023 is going to be harder than getting a loan this year. then it does become a math problem to say, okay, I'm only going to have cash to grow the top 80% of these products. That means my bottom 20% are going to have to go. And then I'm going to have the guts as a CEO to say, okay, we hate to let you go, Susie, but we're letting you go. You're out of here, right? We're going to liquidate this inventory. It was a good experiment, but I'm going to redeploy that cash into the other product here that's more profitable, that's going to get me further, faster towards my goals.
Two things that if you could send links, we'll post those to the show notes to people that really want to go on that into that return on working capital. I think that's a new metric that actually we're not looking at that I am really interested in. And then I just wanted to point out, you said killing your children. That is an excellent analogy. I was looking at a super slow selling product the other day. My wife was in the product photography. We did it like 5 years ago, and I wrote the listing like it was before we were outsourcing anything. And gosh, it does. It feels like you are killing a child. So what is, and actually I'll just tell you about this product. So we have inventory of it. It's sitting in a warehouse. And my thought is, well, let's just discount prices and sell through. Like, I'm not going to reorder, but also there's no point in me dumping this in a dumpster. I'm just not going to run PPC on it. And if I sell 2 a month for the next 15 years, oh, well. So like, how do you effectively kill the children?
No, it's really hard because I think, again, in an imaginary world where you have unlimited cash, you would always do exactly what you said. Man, I'm going to turn off PPC. I'm going to let Susie ride off into the sunset. It'll take 15 years, but I'll sell through that. I look at my inventory report and I've got 10,000 days of inventory. Whatever it is, I'm just going to sell through it. It's fine. So this is where it takes some courage. Like, the real question is not, can I make a little bit of profit or not a profit on this product? The real question is, if I had that cash, if I had access to that capital that I was getting back, could I deploy that into another investment that would do better for me, right? That's actually the real question. The real question is, if I had to lose a little bit more, maybe I discount a little bit more aggressively or do something, go to a liquidator, whatever you have to do, right? And I decide this product's a loser. And so 2 things, I want to free up my mental space to start working towards products that are really achieving my goals. And second, I want to free up the cash. I may not be able to free up much cash, but I want to be able to redeploy that capital to a project that's going to give me a higher ROI. And so again, if you have unlimited cash or you just got a ton of capital in your business right now, don't worry about it. You get to keep a lot more like dud products if you get cash. But if you're trying to decide, it's funny, you were talking earlier, man, I only have capital to launch one of these 3 great ideas I have. Okay, well, what if I could liquidate the junk in this clunker and do 2 of those 3 great ideas instead of just 1? Now I've got the power to move forward more quickly.
Yeah, for sure. No, I really want to give a shout out to Tyler. This podcast is going amazing, and we're ripping through these questions like crazy. And excellent, quick responses. I like it. So as we're talking about like cash flow budgeting, we're moving into it's what it seems like a cycle that this is really, really important. And so, are there any tools or recommendations for sellers, like QuickBooks or anything like that, to really like drill in on cash flow and budgeting, say over an annual cycle or something?
Yeah. So in terms of like getting forecasting and budgeting right, I mean, just want to acknowledge it's really hard. Like that's the most difficult part of this for a CFO and for the seller that's out there. And in terms of technology and tools, I wish I had like a silver bullet. I'll tell you what we're testing. We're currently testing Fathom, which kind of integrates with QuickBooks Online and Xero. So Fathom is kind of a dashboarding tool, and not to get too nerdy about it, but it will at least take a 24-month trailing revenue and do a regression model that takes into account like seasonality to try to build you out a model for the future. And so we're like, wow, that's potentially exciting, because now we're having to manually build them right now, and that sucks, right? And that's what everyone out there who's listening to is like, if you've ever had to build a manual like model, you're like, wow, that I would love to get those hours of my life back, because that really sucked. And so,
absolutely, and that's the one thing that I'll just share with you how we've been doing it. Okay. I like to look at cash coming into the account in that relationship between P&L revenue. So my P&L revenue may be $100,000, but the actual cash coming into my account is $65,000. And so we can forecast out our revenue and then understand that relationship of what cash is coming into our account. It's super manual. And that's like, I find it being the toughest part of my job is this forecasting. You get hit with inventory storage limits. There's all these surprises, and it's like, I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm going to do my best. And so, I was curious, Fathom. I'm going to have to check that one out.
So that's the tool. And I think in terms of and you started the process. So if someone's starting from scratch, we're getting into the end of Q4, I want to try to do a forecast for next year. The first thing you have to do, and something that really your accountant can never do for you, is that demand forecast. Like, that's the thing that you have a better crystal ball than I do, right? You know what your marketing efforts are going to be. And guess what? You're not going to be right, but you're going to be closer than the average bear at trying to figure out, what do I think my sales will actually be in January, February, March, April, May, June, July, right? Like, just do the thing and try to decide what our volume is going to be. And then a couple of things are actually really helpful from that. One is by the way, I would be very suspicious of any budget or forecast. You guys will laugh at this because we've all seen these where it's like, you look at the past and it's like negative, lose money, low margin. Then all of a sudden you hit next month and it's like, this guy couldn't do anything more to print money. Like, this business is going to make so much cash every future month ever. Like, I can't believe it, right? And so you want to make sure that you do kind of a BS common sense check of your model, because your past performance actually is the best predictor of what your profit margins will be in the future, unless you make some major changes. And so, okay, I've done my demand forecast. I think I'm going to do this many units in January, this many units in March. And that means I'm going to have to reorder at these points, or I'm going to have to spend this money. And then just realize the final thing with this is, if I'm going to grow, I'm going to need more working capital. Like, I have found very, very few businesses that can somehow grow a lot and still like use the same amount of capital. In other words, and what I mean by that is, if I currently have $100,000 in inventory and I double my business, probably going to need $200,000 in inventory. And so that's really helpful to know, because if I'm like, okay, great news, babe, me going my wife, we're talking about getting a loan. I'm like, hey, sweetheart, this is going to be great. I'm going to double the business next year. And she's like, okay, well, how much loan are we gonna have to get? Now I can actually tell her, right? And she can be like, I don't know about that $200,000 line of credit, right? But it's just plan for that in advance. And then the final thing I'll say about it, because I know you guys have some things to say about it too, is that in a bearish market, sometimes it might make sense to slow down your growth just a little bit and prioritize profit margin. And I was on a call with a CFO client yesterday where we talked about this, where he's like, Tyler, I quit my full-time job and I really need to start pulling a little bit of cash out of the business to pay my mortgage, but we're growing a lot. Like, how much can I afford to pull out? And I said, well, you actually need to tell your business how much it can afford to grow, because you've got to pay your mortgage, right? And so you end up thinking, okay, mama needs $5,000 a month to pay the mortgage and put shoes on the baby. That means the first $5,000 that come out is going to mama, because mama happy, everyone's happy, right? That leaves me with whatever's left in the internally generated cash flow, the profits from a given month, that I could potentially invest in increased inventory. And if you kind of view it that way, you may choose to throttle back a tad to prioritize making. And by the way, how would you do that? You would just raise your prices, or you would lower your ad budget a little bit, slow down the growth a tad, and capture more profit margin.
Very nice. Very nice. You had, in that answer, you had talked about, doubling your business and then knowing what your capital needs are. And this dovetails pretty nicely into debt, which is a really helpful tool. But as we're experiencing this in our businesses with floating interest rate lines of credit, we've seen our interest expense double since last year. And so what's your opinion on a healthy level of debt? Whether you're just for running this type of business.
Yeah. I think in general, I agree with you. I think having leverage, having debt can really be a powerful tool for growing these kinds of businesses. And they're a lot more attractive to you and me when the interest rates are, what was the CARES Act had 3.75, 30-year. If you can get that kind of debt, you take it all day, every day, because your ability to make money with that investment is kind of a no-brainer. But to your point, David, as the interest rates continue to creep up, and I don't have a crystal ball here, but I can almost guarantee you they're going to creep up more than they even have so far. We're going to have to be more selective, right? I mean, our costs are actually going up, and it means we have to, it's to our discussion earlier, we're gonna have to be even a little bit more aggressive killing bad products, because here's the definition of insanity. That same situation we talked about earlier, David, where you just let Sally ride off into the sunset and you sell a few units a day. But what if you're paying $20,000 a year in interest expense just to keep Sally on the shelf because you're not getting your cash back out of it? Ooh, I got to make sure I'm counting those additional costs, and interest expense is one of them. And so in terms of what's a healthy ratio, I think a more important question is probably to say, okay, how much risk can my family weather if we had a disruption in our business? And what I mean by that is, if I'm independently very wealthy, if I've got a huge 401k, my wife has a professional job, she's a physician, then my ability to carry a lot of aggressive debt on my business is probably okay. Mortgage is going to get paid. Baby's going to get fed regardless. But if this is my only asset, and if this business goes bankrupt and my entire family is toast, I may have to actually choose to be more conservative with my balance sheet, because the problem with leverage, if you have debt, if things go bad, they can kind of snowball, right? Amazon shuts you down, your supplier. I had a client a few weeks ago who had a catastrophic quality issue with one entire container. A 40-foot container comes to the States and has a quality issue that forces them to shut down their hero SKU for about 6 weeks. They're talking about an 8-figure seller. So this is a $2 million in revenue, $500,000 in free cash flow kind of like problem. And it tanked their listing organic ranks so much that they almost have never recovered. And so you think about that business. This is an 8-figure seller with a lot of track record, but he had one major disruption and he was kind of in trouble. And so what we're working through now is, man, we wish that we had a little bit less debt on the balance sheet, because now with interest rates rising and our cash flow down, we're having a hard time servicing our payments.
Got it. Is there, when you're looking at a balance sheet, is there a metric? For instance, like I always like to look at my debt level relative to inventory balance, thinking if shit hits the fan, I can sell out of all my inventory and cover my debt, and then I'm left with zero liability. Is there any like metrics you're applying to say you need to lever up or de-lever?
I think it's a pretty good, what you just said, David, is so wise, because if you think about it, when most of us as sellers are not buying a lot of real estate, you may get a warehouse eventually. Most of us, we don't have a whole lot to spend money on except for inventory. Let's be honest. I mean, we're going to buy ads, but we tend to buy ads in the same month that Amazon pays us or Shopify pays us. And so I think where you have to be careful is if it's not what you just described. If you look at your balance sheet and you have $100,000 in inventory, but you've got $1 million in debt on your balance sheet, that tells me that you're borrowing money and not investing it in the inventory that makes you money. You're either borrowing it to pay yourself, or you're borrowing it to pay a huge staff that you can't carry. And so I think your point is well taken. Maybe that's a great rule of thumb. If you are close to 1-to-1 inventory to debt ratio, you're probably okay, because like David said, if shit hits the fan, you can liquidate and you come out clean. If you see that debt to inventory ratio getting really high, like I've got a ton of debt, which by the way, normally you see that because you're not very profitable. Like I keep buying inventory, but I'm not actually making a high return on that investment. And so I keep borrowing and I'm kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I kind of build this thing, ding, ding, ding. And eventually that house of cards can kind of implode. And so, yeah, that can be something to be careful of. But I think in general, by the way, we're poo-pooing this, but I'm a big fan of getting debt to build these businesses. This is a great idea. And in fact, when interest rates are, even though they're climbing, I would rather you take a little bit of extra line of credit right now and make sure you have liquidity than to run out of cash next month, right? What we're trying to say is just be a little bit more conservative with the investments you pick and how quickly you run close to red line. Because if you run at red line, eventually you're going to hit a disruption, quality issue, container gets stuck in a port, and you're going to end up crashing the ship, and you don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's really good. All right, so last question here, probably the hardest one, maybe not. So we're going to ask Tyler to get out the crystal ball. So like the kind of the theme of the podcast was like the next, we're out of the frothy stage. We're into kind of operating lean. And so over the next 12 to 18 months, what is your advice to sellers? What are like maybe the top 2 or 3 things to focus on to kind of weather this storm?
Yeah, I mean, the things we've talked about are good. Be profitable, make sure you have enough cash. But guys, I just want to say that this is a reversion to common sense. Like 3 years ago, the aggregators were paying such high multiples for an Amazon-only business with 5 hero SKUs, no people, no complexity, no IP, no nothing, that we were lulled into kind of a false sense of like, maybe that's just the right way to run a business, is to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible. And that, in a lot of ways, is still good. Simple is good. But now, to kind of pivot to your question there, Ken, now it's time to invest. Can I do anything to own more of the relationship with my customers? Can I do anything to do more discovery to understand what she cares about, so that if I was going to re-engineer my products, I do it in a way that really meets her needs better? Now's the time, if you have a lot of cash, to maybe invest in a secondary sales channel where, okay, the aggregators were paying irrational valuations for a one-channel business that was frankly kind of objectively pretty risky. Right. And now that they're not doing that, okay, cool. Let me go ahead and try to build an organization if I'm going to really build a company, or let me try to expand to another market. By the way, I say that with a small caveat. Don't shotgun approach this. There's nothing worse than half-assing 3 new sales channels. Pick one. Do your research. If it's the UK, go all in with the UK with Amazon. If it's Canada, go Canada. If it's Shopify, get ready to spend some money buying influencers and buying those Facebook and Google ads. In other words, don't show up unprepared to make the investments. But if you have the liquidity right now, now's the time to place those bets that if they work out, will get you that premium valuation in 3 years when it's a better time to sell.
Awesome.
So Ken, what he's saying is going after UK, Germany, Canada, and Walmart in the same year is going to cause stress, which is what we're feeling right now, man. And so, that is really good advice. I like that. And so, Tyler, before we get to the fire round, can you talk about Seller Accountant and what services your company offers that may be helpful to our listeners?
Yeah, thank you. It's I really, by the way, guys, I really appreciate you having me on the show today. So, Seller Accountant is not flashy. We do bookkeeping, we do fractional CFO for e-commerce sellers. So that's our entire business. I also have a podcast, Return on Podcast. That's kind of more of the finance strategy side of this. That's a way to kind of hear about us. But yeah, if you guys need help with bookkeeping or with getting more profitable, we might be a good partner for you.
Sounds good. And what about Sellers Roundtable?
Yeah, so I do lead. This is, by the way, this is a funny thing. I'm getting Sellers Roundtable is a mastermind for 7 and 8 figure e-commerce sellers that I lead, and it's been amazing because it's this great close knit group. But damn it is not a business, boys. I don't feel great saying this. There's 15 of us at the group, and it's kind of a waiting list kind of thing now. So at some point, maybe I'll turn this into some of these guys like Andrew and some of the guys that have turned these into great businesses. For me, it's an intimate kind of board of directors kind of group. And if you're not in a mastermind, find one. Doesn't need to be mine, but find one where you can get accountability and counsel. And if you want to get on our waiting list for when a slot opens up, feel free to reach out. We kind of do like hopefully the like happy kind of marriage of what's the latest, greatest with an Amazon business, coupled with how do we implement traction? How do we drive execution in our organizations? How do we become better leaders? How do we become better husbands and wives? It's a little bit more holistic becoming a CEO. Plus we're all Amazon sellers that.
Excellent. Tyler, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. What's your favorite book?
Okay. So the EOS Traction book by Gino Wickman is currently my favorite business book. Love it. I just reread it, finally hired a coach to help me, and was worse at it than I thought it was. Read Traction. And then on a personal level, Amazon had the new Rings of Power, Lord of the Rings series, and we just like freaking ate it up. I love it. So I'm rereading the Lord of the Rings right now. Talk about like the 3 layers of nerd there. We're going to talk about accounting, Traction, EOS, and Lord of the freaking Rings. But yeah, I'm reading Lord of the Rings.
Awesome. I love it. What are your hobbies?
Okay, so recently I love anything that combines math, strategy, and competition. And so Texas Hold'em and chess are my two jams right now. So I am play a little chess on chess.com. I'm going to a conference here in a couple of weeks where I'm going to go a day early to Vegas and get my ass kicked in a Texas Hold'em tournament, because I gotta know for sure that I shouldn't be a pro poker player. My $150 is gone. I'm going to go ahead and say that, but it'll be a lot of fun. So that's what I'm getting into right now.
That's awesome. I like how you're dipping the toe in the water and checking it out. I think that shows a lot. So that's awesome. I wish you luck on that. I'm not good at Texas Hold'em at all. What is one thing that you do not miss about working for the man?
The political meetings, man. We had so many meetings where it was a middle manager chewing another middle manager's ass. I was that lower middle manager getting the ass chewed for not presenting the presentation in a way that made the guy look great in front of the executives. And so like the fact that you can be in a small business and cut through the BS and politics, man, I don't miss that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to the insight onto this one, because you work with so many e-commerce entrepreneurs. So what do you think sets apart successful e-commerce entrepreneurs from those who give up, fail, or never get started?
I really chewed on this question because I love this question. And I think the most successful entrepreneurs in any industry have a growth mindset. They're gritty, and they demonstrate that grit and growth mindset by joining some kind of a peer group or coaching group. Like there's a reason that LeBron James spends like $500,000 a year on coaches and people to take care of his body, because his body's a machine. That's how he makes his money. Like Tiger Woods doesn't necessarily pay to go to a country club because he's, famous and they'll let him play, but he pays a lot of money for coaches to make his swing better. And my point is if you want to be a successful CEO, find a mastermind. It's funny, we mentioned Sellers Roundtable. We may not have a spot for you right now, but find a spot where you can be humble and get in front of people who will call you out. I had friends on my mastermind the other day just completely call me to task. They're like, bro, you're believing your own bullshit in that area. Like that's an area where you're blind. And I was so pissed off at them, Ken. And then I went home and I was like, damn it, they're right. I've got to change the way I'm thinking about it. And thank God, because it kept me from making a really major disastrous decision. And so I think just being humble enough to surround yourself with people who will call you out is really a crucial part of being successful.
Yeah, excellent answer. I 100% agree. David, over to you to close out the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Tyler, I want to thank you for being a guest on the Firing the Man podcast, and looking forward to staying in touch. So always good to talk to somebody in the industry, and your perspective is very, very valuable. We really appreciate it. So thank you.
David, Ken, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.